week is a long time in international politics. Between the flag waving and sky gazing, summits like the G7 and NATO give leaders a chance to come face to face, to reflect on the strength of their partnerships. After a week of meetings, Germany's Chancellor came to this conclusion.
Die Zeiten, in denen wir uns auf andere völlig verlassen konnten, die sind ein Stück vorbei. Das habe ich in den letzten Tagen erlebt. Und deshalb kann ich nur sagen, wir Europäer müssen unser Schicksal wirklich in unsere eigene Hand nehmen. Wir müssen selber für unsere Zukunft kämpfen, als Europäer, für unser Schicksal. Und das will ich gerne mit Ihnen gemeinsam tun.
She had a sympathetic crowd of the party faithful for her message that Europe can no longer rely solely on its friendships with the US and the UK. It came after US President Donald Trump berated NATO allies for not maintaining promised defence spending levels.
The US is currently paying much more than any other nation, and that is not fair to the United States or the United States taxpayer.
While messages like these are being delivered in front of receptive American audiences, President Trump has also shared similar views with the world. We have a massive trade deficit with Germany, plus they pay far less than they should on NATO and military. Very bad for US. This will change. The White House is trying to reassure the public that the partnership between two of the West's major allies is still solid.
I think the relationship that the president has had with Merkel, he would describe as fairly unbelievable. They get along very well. He has a lot of respect for her.
But that week of meetings in May has led to questions about whether the president's diplomacy has been lost in translation.
Die transatlantische Beziehung ist von überragender Bedeutung. Und das, was ich gesagt habe, ist ja lediglich darauf hinzuweisen, dass es angesichts der augenblicklichen Situation wir nämlich unser Schicksal in Europa auch alleine in die Hand nehmen müssen.
And perhaps that means ushering in an era of Europe first. Natalie Pohanen, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this, I'm joined from London by Theodore Roosevelt Malloch. He was an advisor on the Trump campaign and is also a senior fellow at the University of Oxford. Also with me is Sergei Lagodinsky. He has the North American EU Research Department at the Berlin-based Heinrich Boel Institute. Thanks, both of you, for joining us. Theodore Roosevelt Malloch, if I could start with you, sir. Is the United States cleaving itself apart from the EU? That seems to be the case after Donald Trump's visit.
There seems to be a divergence between the U.S. under President Trump and the EU at present under the leadership of Germany and Chancellor Merkel. They have had a summit meeting, obviously, in the White House, met a number of times at various meetings in Europe, most recently last week. And I think it's clear that they are actually on very different paths. It doesn't surprise anyone because Mr. Obama called Mrs. Merkel his favorite politician. He appeared last week in Berlin with her. And of course, we had an election in the United States. And President Trump is moving down a path that is, I would say, 180 degrees divorced from where President Obama was. So the fallout between President Trump and Mrs. Merkel, I think, is something to watch. It will cover the whole landscape from economic relations to diplomatic relations to collective security.
So it's something to watch. You're watching it closely. But Theodore, he went as the anti-Obama, as you mentioned. I guess he succeeded. Is this damaging or is it productive? What do you think?
Well, I think from the American perspective, it's probably something to be welcomed because I would say most Americans are tired of having to lead an ungrateful European continent and pay for their defense security, which we've done, of course, for decades upon decades. So it could actually turn out to be productive if the result is that the Europeans take seriously or more seriously their own status in the world, their own relationship with each other, and particularly their burden sharing for the cost of NATO in particular, but for all the collective security that the United States has up to now provided.
Okay, so Sergei, most Americans are tired of having to lead an ungrateful Europe, and that's the context of why Trump did what he did and said what he said. What do you think?
Well, first of all, I do not agree that most Americans are tired and that they agree with Mr. Trump. To begin with, we know the numbers. We know the polling results of November last year. And we're not talking here about most Americans. The approval ratings of Mr. Trump are high with his supporters, but they are not high at all if you look at the American population in total. So this is already basically a lie or manipulation. And let's not forget the trade volume of the United States with Europe is 3 times larger than with Asia. Are Americans going to be happy about making this, breaking this? I think that Mr. Trump has given very strong signals, had given very strong signals prior to last week and prior to the G7 meetings that he had, and those were enough. I think he has overdone with his signaling, if it was all about signaling. He has done it in a highly unprofessional, undiplomatic way, and this is something that not just has surprised everyone, but that basically brought everyone in a state where there is no willingness to even try to please this president. And I think that strategically this was a totally wrong decision. And I wonder who are the counselors and the advisors of Mr. Trump.
Okay, well, one of the guys who...
Whether they understand what is going on.
Okay, so Theodore Roosevelt Malek, is that a fair accusation that the counselors and advisors don't really understand what's going on? They're gambling with a very important alliance.
Well, I don't think it's a complete rupture in the alliance. There's still a very strong and historic transatlantic relationship where we share values and commitments and the defense establishment. The advisors the president has, from the Secretary of State to his national security advisor to his defense minister, have all counseled him along the path that he's taken. I mean, he is the elected president of the United States. It's not to say he hasn't been challenged or even obstructed by Democrats in the Congress, but he is the president. He gets to determine U.S. foreign policy. I don't think there's going to be a massive rupture at all in U.S. trade with European countries or with Germany. I think we're just looking for a fair and continuation of the trade that exists. Right now, it's an imbalanced trade, and Europe seems to be arranged economically to the benefit of Germany, whether you look at the euro and its constellation and its valuation, or you look at the way the decisions are made in the European Union, and particularly on trade matters.
Okay, so Sergei, when Donald Trump tweeted after the visit, right, so, there was all that signaling that you talk about, but then there were also some very harsh words, as is usually the case. And on Twitter late at night, when he tweeted, "We have a massive trade deficit with Germany, plus they pay far less than they should on NATO and military. Very bad for US, this will change." Is there anything that he said there, Sergei, that's wrong?
Well, it's as so often in diplomatic intercourse, it's about the form and the tone with which things are said.
But
what he's saying is nothing new at all. And by the way, well, of course he's talking the truth, but if I started talking the truth about, the partner sitting on the other side,
by President Bush, by President Obama, and
Theodore,
by past administrations.
Give Sergei a second, and then you can come in.
But he's doing it in a way that, but he's doing it in a way that has destroyed and is destroying the transatlantic alliance. So the transatlantic alliance has survived the way how George W. Bush said it, the way how Obama said it. There was always this signaling that the Europeans should invest much more in their defense spending, but they did it in a way that encouraged and strengthened the transatlantic alliance. And by the way, sentences like the sentence of my counterpart today about about how Germany is bad for Europeans, it is none of the business of foreign leaders to explain Europeans what is in their interest as for internal European debates. The same is true with Trump's statement on the borders and how Germany or any other country can decide on what its border policies are. I can criticize these policies. Many people do criticize these policies. But if you start being like in a playground between people, between youngsters, if this is the new level of transatlantic relations, then they're not just about to rupture, they are already ruptured.
Okay, let's listen to what the German foreign minister had to say, and I'll ask you about it after we hear it. Take a listen.
When one country goes to another country that is not respecting human rights and signs a huge weapons contract, when the country knows that people are suffering or dying because of climate change, then I say the West has become smaller, or at least it has become weaker.
Theodore Roosevelt Malek, good point there by the German Foreign Minister Gabriel. Donald Trump goes to Saudi Arabia. He says, hey, I'm not here to lecture you. Not at all. I'm here to respect you. I'm signing a deal with you. And then he goes to Europe, a crucial ally who are far superior to the Saudis in terms of human rights and so on. And he lectures them. And some would say he bullies them. So again, to Sergei's point, there was an issue with optics here and PR, right? It was the way he expressed himself. Do you find there was a problem there?
Well, I think that President Trump has a unique way of communicating and articulating his point of view, and we're getting used to it. He's not a typical politician. He wasn't elected on that basis. Let's just restate the facts. European countries have committed for decades to pay 2% of GDP for the costs of NATO. Only 5 of them have met that bill. The United States is presently paying about 70% of those costs. And of those 5 countries, some of them are actually smaller and weaker countries. So Germany is at 1.2%, and it claims it wants to get to 2%, but can't give us a deadline by which time it can get to that. Vice President Pence, when he went to the Munich Security Conference, told the Europeans, and I quote him, "Our patience is wearing thin." That's what I'm suggesting. That's what President Trump has said. We are asking the Europeans to pay their fair share of the burden to which they committed themselves, nothing more.
Right, okay, and then Sergei, Angela Merkel saying in response, we can't fully rely on the United States and we have to take our fate into our own hands. What does that mean exactly? Does that mean pivoting towards the Chinese, pivoting towards the Indians and so on? Is that going to solve Germany's and Europe's problems?
Well, if I may, before I answer your question directly, just let's put the facts straight. There is no official commitment of the European states that would bind them to increase the 2%, to reach the 2% target. This was a voluntarily, absolutely, a kind of a vision that they have
made the commitment many
to themselves,
times.
and they are working on that. So just to put it, then the one case when NATO has become active in the past decades was a case on Article 5 in support of the United States. We have 1,000 dead Canadians and Europeans who died in Afghanistan because they, not the other way around, they came to support to the United States. So let's not twist the facts. And what does it make? What sense does it make to just increase spendings in terms of numbers if you don't have the infrastructure, if you don't have the strategy? If Germany would increase its spendings to 2%, they wouldn't know where to go with the money because it has to be a sustainable development of a strategic and infrastructural outlook.
Just like in Germany, the people don't want defense spending, yet there was this commitment to like 2%, right? The people don't want money spent on defense. It's a democracy. Angela Merkel has to listen to her people, but also balance their commitment. You would understand the US as well. Trump came to the presidency based on a number of promises, which can be deemed isolationist, tough on NATO, tough on the EU, and so on. He has to balance that, appealing to that electorate, and of course, the pledges and the promises. So both ways, there's that push and pull, right?
Well, there were many more promises that he is not capable to deliver in the domestic realm. I do not think that his electorate wanted the NATO be broken. I do not think that his electorate wanted that there will be trade war between the United States and Europe. He was talking about Mexico and NAFTA. He wasn't paying that much attention to Europe. The hardcore were Obamacare, where he failed, the tax program that he's trying to engage, and I'm not sure this is going to work. He did not deliver on any of his promises in the domestic realm, and now he is turning to the foreign policy, trying and honestly breaking a lot of China there. So
okay.
I'm not sure that people in the Rust Belt are waiting and dying to see how NATO is going to break down.
Okay, so let's put NATO aside for a second, because there is a danger of using the EU and NATO interchangeably, and I think that can confuse things as well. Let's talk specifically about the EU. If Angela Merkel and the Europeans, and let's bring in the French as well and others, if they want to move away from the alliance with the United States, is China the answer? Is making trade deals with the Chinese and the Indians and others, is that going to solve their problems?
Well, the first and the most important answer is Europe. And this is what
I think
it is all about.
We're living in a global economy, so the Europeans will
Theodore,
choose
just a second.
with whom they want to have their relations.
If Sergei could just take a little bite at that, and then you can come in. Sergei?
Yes. So we are having a special moment in the European history. I think that the election results of Macron in Paris in France were extremely important and has kind of motivated Merkel and others to take this stance. I think it would have been different if we had another result in France. So there is this mobilization, also mobilization of population within the European Union. European Union sees that it has some potential and some power within itself. And now they want to take on reforms. We have a lot of talk of and a lot of action of how to reform, proposals of how to reform European Union. And frankly, there are proposals like European defense, European army. There are proposals like European finance minister. And this is what is going to be discussed. Merkel is using this moment. And yes, Merkel is using Trump, which is not very hard to do, in order to galvanize and mobilize inner European powers. And then Europe will decide with whom they want to work. Mm-hmm. Yes, today was the Chinese Prime Minister was here, and their meeting was very, positive, has kind of transpired positive vibes. Why? Because on the same day as the Chinese person, the Chinese politician is here, Trump is about to announce his withdrawal from the climate Treaty of Paris. I mean, is this strategically wise to do this? No, he's pushing Europeans into the arms of Chinese.
Okay, I've got to move on. It's been a pleasure talking to both of you, Theodore Roosevelt-Malech and Sergei Lagodinsky. Thanks so much for sharing your insight and expertise with us.